So we are glad you are here with us today. Let's get to our experts and our special guest. First, I'd like you to meet Katie Tammany. Katie is Chief Marketing Officer at Monrovia, and she is also our Chief Storyteller and Trend Spotter. She brings us insights into wonderful ways that we can enjoy our outdoor spaces in any season. Katie has more than 25 years of expertise in lifestyle and leisure industries, and she's the former editor of Sunset Magazine and also a longtime avid gardener with specific interests in the connections between garden, art, health, and well-being. Hi, Katie.
Hello.
Next, I'd like you to meet Megan McConnell. Megan is Monrovia's Plant Information Director. In addition to managing Monrovia's plant database of more than 4,000 different varieties, Megan is responsible for all of the plant information that appears on monrovia.com and on the tags that you see in the garden center. If you've asked a question in the past during a webinar, chances are you've already had a conversation with Megan. She supplies many of your answers during our talk, and she is our go-to plant authority expert. Hello, Megan.
Hello.
I'm excited to introduce you to today's special guest, Brooke Garcia. Brooke is Garden Director for Magnolia. She joined Chip and Joanna Gaines to help bring their Waco, Texas vision to life by creating beautiful garden spaces at the Magnolia silos. Brooke combines her horticulture and design expertise to feature show-stopping seasonal color displays, cut flower gardens, and elevated outdoor spaces at Magnolia. Brooke is passionate about creating a sense of home and beauty through plants, so you know she is a kindred spirit to all of us here, and we are so happy to have her join us today. Welcome, Brooke.
So excited to be here. Thank you.
So with that, Katie, I'm handing it off to you.
Great. Well, let's get in the holiday spirit. I realize that, we're just putting out our pumpkins, but it's also a great time to start thinking ahead. And we want to help you get organized so your holidays and your gardening outdoors are less stressful. So as Kathleen mentioned, we'll get into it by first tackling a poll, which is our usual way of starting our webinars. So which style best describes you? Are you somebody that really wants to create a refined holiday, and you have containers that are just packed with greenery and festive pine cones and berries? Or are you somebody that, let nature take over? That's your philosophy in the garden. Let the berries be bearing and, the trees shedding their leaves, and so be it. Or maybe you're interested in a bright celebration, and your idea of holiday decorating is to really light up the garden, especially with trees and shrubs and really showing off their forms. So Kathleen, go ahead and launch the poll. I can't see it on my screen. Oh, there we go. So voting is now open. Let us know what's your style. So it looks like we have a lot of people willing to let nature take over, which I think is so lovely. We know that the birds need us in the winter time, and so the more you can let your garden be during the season, the better for the birds. So we still got a lot of, voting underway. I'm thinking that I don't have everybody participating. 80% so far. Come on, go ahead and choose what's the right one for you. I think it's pretty clear that the leaders are letting nature take over, and maybe a little bit of a refined holiday. So really both actually using, greenery in the garden to its fullest extent. So love that. Okay, so sharing the results. 48% say let nature take over. 35% the refined holiday. Great, thanks for participating. Well, let's jump in. We're going to talk about holiday decor, but we're also going to talk about just getting ready for the season. Getting ready for the season. Particular tips about specific plants that you want to keep in mind, what to do with those holiday containers, some great design ideas and principles that you can apply. Brooke will be sharing her secrets from Magnolia, and then holiday garden ideas, thinking beyond the container as well. So since we have a lot to cover, we're going to jump in. And I'm going to start by asking Megan to sort of take us through what are some high-level things we can keep in mind as we prepare for the season.
Yeah, so I think it's helpful to know what plants are doing right now. So they're starting to go dormant and go to bed, and what they're doing is pushing all their nutrients down to the roots. So you're getting a lot of great root growth, and then they're going to go dormant, drop all their leaves if they're deciduous to protect themselves in the winter. So knowing that they're doing all this growing in the roots, this is a great time to plant, especially trees and shrubs, just huge benefits so that they can get roots established before next summer's hot weather and less water. So trees and shrubs, your spring bulbs for sure. You can plant perennials this time of year too. Not quite as those amazing benefits, but you absolutely can. An exception, I live in the Pacific Northwest and it's really wet here. Those perennials that really like good drainage, they're just going to sit in the wet all winter. So I've actually started putting those in spring, and I find that works a lot better here. After planting, you always want to keep things properly watered. So keep watering. This is the time to put your irrigation to bed, but you know, and plants are needing different amounts of water. It's cooler, days are getting shorter, but kind of keeping an eye on things, maybe doing some hand watering for things that need it. Mulching, so important. You always want the ground covered. You never want bare dirt. This time of year, it's great for it because not only does it do what it does all year long and help keep moisture in, but also it's protecting your roots. It's good to check up on your mulch this time of year. Some of it might have washed away with your irrigation or watering during the year. And also for me, it's mostly just to keep my dog's feet from getting all muddy and cracking it all over the house. So if you're someone who likes to overwinter plants indoors, we'll go over a couple options for that later. Now's the time to start keeping an eye on that first frost. Think about bringing those things inside to overwinter. This is a good time to amend your soil with organic matter. It has some time to break down. Don't work your soil if it's really wet. But you should stop fertilizing. So fertilizing isn't the same as organic matter. It's giving it those nutrients right now. We want things to go dormant, and fertilizing right now can actually bring things back to life and make it push new growth that can get damaged. So no more fertilizing.
Well, that's one thing we can take off of our to-do list as we think about the season. So Brooke, that brings me to talking about your winter preparation checklist, and you look very organized. You want to take us through how you approach the season? Oh, you're muted. Oh.
I love how Megan kind of took like this high level approach, and my brain is like very detailed. So I have lived in various regions across the US, from Indiana to Kansas to Texas, which is where I currently am. I've also lived in Florida, so I know that this list varies, you know, where you are. But what I really try to do is, you know, every year I kind of come back to this list and figure out what can I add, you know, what got missed from the previous year. And so this is kind of like my detailed go-to. And that way, when we turn the corner into this season, I'm really ready to go because I kind of have this outline of what I know needs to be done. So, you know, in Texas, we have a growing season really up until, you know, late November, sometimes early December. So we are still like pushing and planting seasonal color all the way through November, which is awesome. We love that. Great place to be as a horticulturist. But also there's, you know, the mulching, like Megan said, and I like to take that time to clean out the greenhouse and just get ready to potentially move some of those tropicals indoors or some of the cactus, more tender plants inside. Other things that, you know, we just kind of don't even think of, but all those leaves that fall, you know, in the fall, you do need to schedule that time for your gutter cleaning or, you know, taking time to do it yourself. Irrigation, depending on where you're at, whether you're winterizing your system or just dialing back to adjust for plant needs. I tend to like to stay on like the less water is better, and, you know, just regularly checking the soil because you don't want to get in a place where you're overwatering. And then Christmas lights, whether you like the bright outdoors or maybe we're skipping that, I think there's so many ways to play with wreaths and seasonal color and greenery and or lights. So that's always something fun to take into account. And then these little random things, like I know I'm kind of moving through my list, but cleaning and sharpening gardening tools, great way to still stay connected with your garden where you're not going to need them quite yet, but it's a good thing to get prepped for spring. And fruit cover cloth, which I'll touch on a little bit later. So, and if you're like me, I'm always like kind of thinking towards spring and the winter because it's a hard time of year if you're, an avid gardener to have to be stuck inside. So, dream about spring and start planning for spring too.
Yeah. Order those seeds. Start thinking ahead. So I wanted to talk to both of you about pruning trees and shrubs. I think a lot of people feel like now's the time to do pruning, but I also know you need to be careful. So we'll start with Megan again for that sort of broad level, and then I'll bring you in, Brooke, to talk about your experience at Magnolia. So take it away, Megan.
Yeah, so Emily, there is a huge range of climates in this country. So timing changes so much. What fall actually means to you, the actual time that it happens can change. So always going to keep in mind your own climate. But generally, just a sort of a good rule of thumb is that you can wait until late winter and early spring. Really, the main thing is you want things to be dormant. So your deciduous things, you want all the leaves to be off of them. That's sort of bare minimum. If you live in a really extreme winter climate, you don't want to have any fresh wounds on your plants going into that as much as possible. So that's why I say generally early spring, exception. I feel like I can go down this like exception and caveat wormhole, so I'm trying to like not do that. But early spring bloomers, they might even have their buds on them now. And they'll definitely in early spring. So don't late winter, early spring. So don't prune your early spring bloomers until after they bloom. But some things you definitely do want to take care of now. Any dead or diseased wood, just any time of year, you can take care of your dead or diseased wood that you see in there. Any potential hazards, if you deal with snow or ice, things that if they get weighed down, they might fall. You want to take care of those before you have any sort of winter weather. And then if you have those plants, those shrubs that grow really fast, and put on, like 2 feet of this fresh new branch that's sort of arching, it's good to cut those back. It's, if you can wait until they drop leaves, but, Physocarpus or, your dappled willows, things that are going to splay out or you're going to lose its form or kind of go when it gets covered in something, it's good to cut those back just so you have control over their shape.
Well, actually, that's a great segue, talking about shape, to some of what you think about, Brooke, at Magnolia. You want to share a few tips with us about shaping and airing out?
Yeah, I love this photo. We brought in a company out of Dallas, Southern Botanical, to help us with some tree pruning at Magnolia. But one of our big challenges was just, getting some shape back to some of our live oaks. And when I do think about trees, they really are like the large investment in your landscape. And I think it's so important to start early, on some of this tree pruning to really establish that shape early on so you can get the right canopy growth. Another just pro tip is, getting this tree care done in the fall really prepares you for Christmas lights. So you're not dealing with all these suckers on your trees. And so if you're kind of thinking ahead in that sense, I found it really helpful to schedule my tree pruning in the fall just to make sure we're like prepped and ready for our Christmas light install at the silos. But this is just a great photo of a tree that we did the canopy clean out, and then there's a little more space and room for birds to come into the trees. And we've actually noticed, even after pruning, that we've just seen a little more wildlife in the trees, which is exciting.
Yeah, and beautiful form. And I think in winter, that's really when we start to really pay attention to the form of our trees, because we're not as distracted by a lot of the, seasonal, perennial, annual color. So getting them ready for their, showtime, as it were, is important. Well, let's talk about perennials, because I think besides trees and shrubs, That's a big question that we get often, when, should I cut back? I know where I live. Should I cut back my salvia, right now? And I like that, Megan, you're sort of leaving a lot of things kind of, well, it's up to you. It depends on the look that you want. But there are some things that you definitely advise that people do cut back right now.
Yeah, so yeah, like you said, there's a lot of, I mean, you in your garden sense, maybe like things a little more wild. Some people like things really tidy. So there's definitely some wiggle room with these things. But phlox, bee balm, columbine, they're prone to getting powdery mildew, which is just like it sounds. It's this sort of white powder that ends up on your plants. So those are good to cut down. Iris as well can get a few foliar diseases. So those are good to cut down. Hosta, especially if you have slug problems, slugs lay their eggs in there during the winter or in the fall and then into the winter. So those are good to cut down. Penstemon, beard tongue, doesn't like a wet crown. So if the foliage is on there, it can kind of keep it too wet. And your peonies. And then this is all stuff that's, it's gone, dormant. It's, ugly colors. It kind of, hostas kind of melt when you get that freeze. That day where you look outside and you're like, oh, well, I guess that's done. You had that hard night and everything looks, when it's time to start thinking about that. Some things that are kind of up to you, just sort of your personal, aesthetics, if you want to or not. Yarrow, Veronica, sage, and with sage, I mean like the meadow sages, the decorative sages. Those you can cut down, but they might get some basal growth, so they might have some fresh leaves at the bottom, especially in a mild climate. So you want to cut above those. You might lose those again, but they protect the crown. So astilbes, you might like to keep those nice, big, tall, beautiful seed heads, but the foliage will kind of get, so you can cut that back or, just leave it. I love to dry astilbe. They're just an excellent flower for drying. So I usually bring mine inside to do that. Daylilies, they don't really provide any benefits to keeping up. If you don't like the look, you can take them down now. I like to leave them till spring because they kind of just take care of themselves and sort of rot away, and then I can just scoop up the leaves that are left over and toss them. And catmints you can cut down or not. Some things that have benefits to leaving up. Heuchera is, pretty much an evergreen. It's kind of a semi-evergreen. So really you can leave it and still have some great foliage color. You just want to clean up any leaves that start to look gross, which are, usually along the bottom, those old things that got battered. Things that have seeds for birds, coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, those are great ones to leave. Ornamental grasses have seeds for birds, and they're also great coverage, shelter for birds, and, lovely, that sort of winter look. It can add a lot of interest to your garden. Ferns, you want to wait until spring when they start putting up their new growth. Asclepias, the milkweeds, butterfly weeds, those, a lot of people grow to benefit insects, and they continue to do that all winter long. They have hollow stems, and some insects live in there, so keeping those up is continuing to help out your insects. Red hot poker can stay evergreen in a lot of areas, or stay green all through winter. So that's a nice one to kind of just leave. And anytime things are still green, they're still, collecting energy. Then spring, I like to cut them back to kind of refresh. And then kind of same thing with the hardy geranium, cranesbill. In some places, those are evergreen, so you can leave them and still have those around. If it's not evergreen in your area, you can cut them back if you want.
So I think this tendency that some of us have to give everything a haircut at this time of year, you're basically saying you don't actually need to do that, but it depends on your style.
Yeah, exactly.
And, sort of how kind of bad, I guess, some plants are looking. So Brooke, here are some great images of some of the plant care chores and fun things that you're doing at Magnolia during this time. You want to take us through a few of these images?
Yeah, so kind of my first list is really like more of a general winter, guide. And now we're kind of like shifting into like more of this plant care guide. And so this is kind of a little like snippet into just like when I think about winter and plant care, this is kind of the things I start shifting to think about. So, I mentioned earlier, like cleaning out the greenhouse. Well, whether you have a space in your garage or your home or, enclosed patio of some sort that you can have dedicated space to put some of your plants indoors. It's really nice to have a space for that. I know my mom just sent me a photo this morning of all of her plants. She moved into her garage, bless her heart. So she's ready. They're going to have a dip in temperatures this weekend. I also love seed starting, in the winter time for spring. And this is really a late winter thing. There's a couple pictures on here in the bottom left Magnolia table. We have these vitex trees that get so big. And so this is always a big winter task to really like selectively prune to reduce the canopy and height of those so you can still see the sign. So thinking about features on your home that you're wanting to still see, and maybe you have shrubs or trees that are encroaching that, I think winter is a great time to do the reduction pruning that you need to do. And then plants like boxwoods, I know throughout the country, boxwoods, unless we're like really on top of them, sometimes they can get taller than we want them to. So this is just me kind of holding my hand out. And I sent this to my team of, hey, let's take this down a couple inches, so this would be more winter pruning. I don't really love like the harsh lines on boxwood. So it's really a good time in the late winter, and then they flush out and they're like fluffy and nice and soft for spring. And then the freeze cover cloth photo, one thing, like if you are in a region where you have the ability to be able to freeze cover because you're just trying to protect plants up to a certain temperature threshold, there's different types of freeze cover cloth. And this is my mistake that you get to learn from, but there's different freeze cover cloth types and weights, and there's transparency differences, and the type of cloth that you get will determine how many degrees that you'll protect your plant. So be a little picky and maybe do some homework. This is like my to-go list homework for you is researching some freeze cover cloth options. Typically what you'd find at the big box stores, is like the darker green, thicker cloth, and that's a great quality freeze cover cloth. So just be mindful you're not buying something that's too thin and too transparent, because it's probably not going to be a super hardy freeze cover cloth for you.
I love that tip. Where I am in California, occasionally we have to cover our citrus and other tender plants, not too often, but I can get away with a very thin cloth. But I know, where you're talking about where your mom is, or certainly where Kathleen is in Minnesota, that is not the case. So thinking carefully about looking ahead to the temperature, drops, and thinking about the thickness that you may need to choose, I think is a great tip. So let's look at your overall list of plant care. Again, it's very detailed, and like you said, it's based on years of experience. And you want to highlight some particular things on here, maybe that we haven't covered yet?
I know. And this is just take a picture of this slide or come back to this webinar and watch later and take this. But a few things we haven't covered on this list yet. We kind of touched on the perennials. We touched on moving things into the greenhouse. We touched on the tree pruning. But another thing to watch for in the wintertime is mistletoe in your trees. So when you're seeing like a dormant tree and then these like little splotches of green, that's not a good sign. Back in the day, there's a whole story. Another homework I can send you home with is researching the history of mistletoe. It's pretty fascinating. They used to think it was really magical and, mysterious. It came out of nowhere.
And not a parasite.
Yeah, exactly. And now it's like not a great thing, but I think the dormant pruning, just really touching on that. So anything that needs significant reduction in size, if you have espalier in your garden, that could be a good time to prune the espalier to kind of get that form and shape back. And then really looking ahead into late winter is when we're doing our grass cutbacks and our rose cutbacks. And so for here in Texas, Central Texas, we kind of target around Valentine's Day to do all of that. And then we get that flush in spring. And then also early winter, it's a good time to plant ornamental trees. And we still are planting some cut flowers and overwintering some cut flowers. And we do have to freeze cover some of them, but that could be kind of a fun thing to figure out in your region. When's a good time to plant some of these cut flowers for your garden to bloom in spring?
Yeah, I know I get in my hellebore and I get so excited because they're the early bloomers for me out here. Let's see. So let's talk about moving those tender plants indoors and some of the things that, if you're living in those colder areas, now's a good time to be thinking about moving them in, protecting them. And maybe, these are plants that might be new to you that you might want to think about for, having for next year that you can overwinter. So go ahead, Megan, take us through these choices.
Yeah, these are just a few things. You can experiment, just any of those just lovely, awesome things you're like, oh, that's not hardy here, give it a try. But some really popular options for doing this. Jasmine's that amazing scent, great gift plant. This is the summer soul Arabian jasmine. Agapanthus, those amazing blue flowers. This is midnight blue. Begonia, such a huge range of cool color, foliage colors. You've got, the Rex begonias have all those crazy colors. This is the Caldera begonia, which is huge, glossy leaves, kind of this like dinosaur looking thing. Really fun. Bougainvilleas have those awesome showy bracts and they bloom for so long outside, so totally worth picking those in so you have that color in summer. Olives are such a fun plant, another great gift plant. There's so much history and meaning in olives, and those do really well inside. And then tropical hibiscus, I mean, who doesn't want those giant flowers?
Right.
So that's the Jessie Jewel Ruby right there. So that's another great one to bring inside.
So while we're talking about bringing things inside and thinking about colder zones, I think it's, this slide to me really shows just how, like you both mentioned, how different regions of the country are going through a very different winter. But while we're talking about overwintering, let's talk about some other tips for colder climate areas, and then what's going on in the warmer zones.
Yeah, so I know some of you have been probably watching this and being like, what is she talking about? So, because it just can be so different. So your really cold areas, you probably want more mulch because they're really going to protect your plants. Most places I would say 2 inches, but if it's really cold, maybe more like 4, especially at the base of your shrubs, your perennials. Snow is your friend in these climates. It actually insulates things and protects things from those really cold, dry winds. So once you get that layer of snow, I know a lot of people kind of breathe a sigh of release in Minnesota. It's you might want to be a little more cautious if there isn't snow about those hard freezes. Maybe I need to cover things because we haven't gotten that snow yet. When there's so much less food out there for critters, things are going to start to get a little more desperate. You need to protect things, those high value plants, put up some caging to keep them away. Your new trees, absolutely. You might need to do some extra protection, even things that are technically cold hardy in your area. Those really dry, cold winds can do a number on them. So you might need to put up some windbreaks or do something to help protect them from that. You can use burlap or canvas, don't use plastic, and check your garden centers. They have all sorts of other options out there. And then you also want to clean out, if you have pots that had annuals and they're done, you want to clean out all the soil. And then any, clay ceramic pots, that those can hold moisture. And if they freeze, they can crack. So you want to bring those inside. And then mild climates, I'm sure people in mild climates have definitely been like, what are you talking about? It's so different. Things actually are starting to wake up a little bit in the fall because some things go dormant in the summer where it's really hot. So things to know, really mild climates, you can plant all fall and winter. I definitely recommend don't wait all the way till spring. It's right before it gets hot. Don't bring your camellias. I mentioned, you know, there's some spring bloomers that really you can prune because they go up all up and down the stems. It's fine, but do not go and, you know, trim your camellia hedge. It already has its blooms. All the buds are on the outside. You're going to take them all off. This is a great time to propagate succulent little pieces that fall off. If your aloes shot off their little pups and you want it like you're just your one aloe by itself, this is a great time to take your little pups. You can move them to pots to help propagate them. Maybe they can replace some plants later. And then after all that heat, there's probably a lot of really crispy done plants out there. So this is a great time to switch out your pots for new plants and clean up all that stuff that's just fried to a crisp.
Yeah, I'm doing a bit of that right now. And I just noticed a few buds on my camellia and I thought, well, I might miss those and think, oh, I should, you know, trim off that rangy piece. So thanks for the reminder. So let's switch gears now and talk about those holiday containers we mentioned at the top of the hour. Brooke, I'm definitely going to look to you to tell us a bit about container design, especially how we move from fall to winter, and maybe some tips on not having to do quite so much work to move through the seasons.
Yeah, I love this planter. This is one that we did last year at the Magnolia Silos on the front of the bakery. Something that you can kind of try to do, at least in your containers, is just by thinking a little bit ahead about like the bones of your planter, and I'll kind of reuse this term of like the bones of your planter. You can save yourself a little bit of work and then save yourself a little money. And also, by the time you want the plants to be big, they're going to be big. So in this photo, you see the purple fountain grass, and there's the very leafy plant called the giant red mustard. So eventually in this planter, what we did is we took the grasses out, and then we had the giant red mustard, you know, with our ornamental pieces and seasonal color in the planter. So it was just a nice way to phase into winter. And then, you know, by the time the mustard was big enough, the grasses, I could take them out, and I already had a full planter ready for winter. So I also love to use herbs and kind of mix in, you know, just like lots of textures and tones and colors. I'm really big on plant palette, but I think it's really fun to kind of bring in ornamental kind of elements, but also like edible elements into your planters.
And I love the, you know, ivy or potato vine kind of idea, you know, spilling out, and then the use of really tiny little bits of color, tiny annuals, you know, that you can bring, you know, remove and then add in something like pine cones, you know, instead. So lovely idea. So yeah, thinking about bones, you know, carrying over to containers, and sort of the bones of a front porch design, I think is the other way I look at these images, also from you at Magnolia. Tell us a little bit about your approach when thinking about a front porch space.
Yeah, I think my first step is always just trying to figure out kind of heights and scale and figuring out approximately what I need. And so for these planters specifically, it was really kind of seeking out, you know, the varying heights for the planters. So it was this really nice staggered look, but also just a little bit of texture contrast, you know, with the different kind of evergreen trees for the planters. I love when we kind of go into the winter season and the holiday season to have kind of like the pyramidal shapes that kind of mimic the Christmas trees. I think it's a really fun way to have that staple in planters. So I tend to kind of go out and I usually buy like a bunch of different heights and layers for planters, and I like to have options. And so it's kind of fun to have just a little bit of extra so you can really make those magic moments happen. But this was just a really clean plant palette and just greens and kind of the silvers and the darker green hues with the ivy. And this is something that can last like throughout the whole winter season here. And if we do have some dieback, you know, it's something that we can just stagger prune out from the ivy.
I love the way the silver foliage kind of plays off the color of the other containers too. It sort of echoes that color, and that you are, bringing together various shades of green. You use a lot of ivy. Would
Yeah,
you say
I love
that's yeah, that's kind of a staple in your containers?
Yeah, I love ivy. In the summer here, it does not work. It always just gets fried. So unless it's just really generously shaded and protected from the heat, we just can't use it. But as soon as we start to get in that fall winter season, I can pretty much use ivy anywhere and
Mhm.
it does okay, which is pretty nice.
Well, and it's a way to create this like lush, I don't know, summery feeling, almost in the, the winter season. So thinking about simplicity, but then adding in some pops of color. You mentioned in your winter checklist, ordering things like pine cones and decorative items that you can add into these containers, and you still have that very soothing green palette going, but you've added some pops of color here. Tell us about these containers and this approach.
Yeah, I think from a very like basic, like the bones of the planters, right? Like here we go back to this. We have these staples in the planters, and then layering in. I actually have some herbs here, so you see some like oregano spilling out, and you see the ivy spilling out in this photo. And then I'm leaving some of those gaps so I can then plug in some of the pine cones and the berries. And so rather than having seasonal color, which I feel like I try every year and it still just does not do super well when we get that hard freeze. So I try to stick to kind of like the bare minimum that will last throughout the season. And then you get to layer in these, berries and pine cones, or maybe for you, it's sprigs of greenery that you can get from the store. Or I've like trimmed magnolia branches and kind of placed little magnolia leaves in the containers as well. So I love this because they last, and I think for me it is an investment, right? To plant all of this throughout the grounds. And so I want it to look good and also last throughout the season.
I love the play of smaller leaved plants, and then you've got the big cabbage, too. And are you always trying to contrast the sort of the size of leaves, I guess, in some of these containers too?
I think for me, I really look at like the shades of green. I love to see
Mhm.
it just several shades of green because I think that's the best way to mimic nature.
Mhm.
It's just to bring in lots of textures and colors and hues. And I think it really helps add that contrast. So your eye is just kind of like drawing from planter to planter or plant to plant, right?
Mhm. Well, you mentioned magnolia, and that made me think, magnolias, the plants. That made me think of some of the trends that we've been following and talking about at Monrovia for quite a while, and how those might be expressed, during the holiday season. So the first trend is, the trend that we think of as, the romance of the garden, and nostalgia too being really a popular component. And classic plants like magnolia, but also topiaries, the pyramidal forms or spirals, globes, using boxwood, using, plants with classic red berries, camellias. That's another sort of romance holiday plant that, that could be your look for the container. And then another trend is the one of abundance. We've talked about sort of Garden of Eden idea and using rosemary. You see these little rosemary trees here. Olive grasses definitely apply. Bay laurel, like our little ragu, or your use of cabbage. And even pomegranate becomes a nice holiday touch. Or the other way to go is the garden of relaxation for the holidays, and that really, your soothing palette of greens really touches on this relaxation trend that we've been following for a while. But you could also use ferns and silver begonias, anything with shades of sort of blue green. Heuchera applies, in this as well. So, those are some of the things that we see people are, using a lot in their container design. So moving from containers out to the rest of the garden, I wanted to talk to you also about creating some other, what I call magic moments in the garden. And one of the things that I like to think of too is that you can, use a container or position a container out in the garden. It can be a focal point, such as the one that you have here. Do you want to take us through some of these ideas?
Yeah, so the planter on the left is actually located at the castle, which is one of the fixer-upper properties that Chip and Jo did. And so we had this kind of moment, and it has like a little circle walkway around it. So it's a really big focal point. And, I hate for it to be empty during the winter season because it's such a beautiful accent in the garden and it really draws your eye to that space. So all of the plants within this planter are evergreen. So it's something that is super nice as we kind of carry through these temperature fluctuations. But there are some ferns in that planter too. And so when those die back, they just get trimmed back. And then in the spring, they flush back out again. So there are kind of like, the cyclical season in the planter, but it's nice just to have something there. So thinking about your own garden space and, if you're hosting or entertaining, I like to kind of touch on that it's nice to still have some spaces that you can be drawn out into your garden still. The photo in the middle, if you remember that planter before where we had the grasses, this same planter, but it's transitioned to winter. So it was like a really easy transition to take the seasonal color out, take the potato vine out, and then put in the little topiary kind of Charlie Brown trees. Just fun. And it's that silver texture. So it's a full planter still, which is fun. And then the photo on the right, I included that above the fireplace mantle just because this is another simple kind of magic moment that you could have in the garden, whether it's, a planter on a tabletop with the ivy or something evergreen. It's just nice to have those little pops of green throughout your outdoor living area or garden space that still makes it feel like, your garden, right? Even though there might be a lot of dieback around and it looks very winter-esque.
Yeah, and I love your use of the wreath too on the window. That's sometimes an unexpected place to have a wreath, but thinking about where else you might place touches of greenery outdoors, like you said, to keep your garden looking alive. There are other places, you could do that too. Certainly, along gates, tying some greenery with a bit of ribbon. If you've got a fire pit outside or, don't, but it's a great time to add one, thinking about how you can add some evergreen shrubs, maybe in containers around that fire pit area to create a welcoming space. And then the other magic moment in the garden at this time of year is, as we said, sort of leaving things be and letting some of those trees and shrubs or grasses that ordinarily take a back seat during the rest of the year, letting them sort of come out into a beautiful form in the winter, possibly covered with frost. So other ways to bring the magic moments indoors, some of the things I think of, especially because of where I live, camellias, our Yuletide camellia, that red color, that looks lovely in, paired with, greenery in a vase. Or you might think about setting in some white tapers in a little bit of soil, surrounding it with rosemary and some red berries. That makes a lovely tabletop decor idea that uses some greenery from outdoors. And then, decorating that image on the right, decorating cute little topiary and setting that out, just kind of a playful style. And I think you were talking about some of the playful things that that Magnolia is bringing into their selection for this season too.
Yeah, I think it's always fun to, bring some of that greenery and that feeling of outdoors inside, especially as we kind of cozy up indoors. It feels very soft and natural to have some of that inside. So there's a couple of Magnolia products like the stockings and the garland at the bottom, but they just launched some of their Christmas products online. So it's kind of fun to get inspired and just see what we're doing and what we're shifting towards this Christmas season.
And you'd mentioned too, just being I think being okay having this mix of greenery, but then if you need a pop of color, it's okay to go for the artificial, and if you don't have that greenery outside, you can go for the ready-made rope of greenery with some pops of color. You can mix that in and feel okay.
Yeah, and I guess we didn't mention this. I know it was on one of the slides, but if you are using like berries outdoors, making sure you get the weatherproof ones that are intended to be outside. I know we've actually sprayed something on our berries too, which kind of like created like a little layer over them so they're protected. So there's ways to kind of navigate that.
That's a good idea. That's a really good idea. Before we pop out and answer questions, I also wanted to ask Megan to talk a bit. People get gift plants during the holidays, and Monrovia is actually we're launching a holiday shop where you can now send plants directly to people as gifts. But what do you do with those gifts, Megan, when you get them? How do you take care of them? So I want to lead us through a few quick tips.
Yeah, so we have a big variety available on the shop right now. You can have them shipped now. You can have them shipped later. You can schedule it so that it gets closer to the holidays. But if you get a house plant, obviously that's going to stay in your house all the time. But this time of year, you want to make sure you keep it away from drafts. I mean, these are generally tropical plants, and they like humidity and they like warmth. So keep it away from drafts. And then if you have forced air heating, make sure it's not like blowing directly on the plant. Because again, they like humidity, and that's gonna, they're not gonna like this dry air blowing away all the humidity. If you get plants like, say, this little dwarf Alberta, and you want to use it inside for your decorations as like a cute little Christmas tree. So you have it inside for a few weeks, but then you want to move it outside. You need to make sure that you slowly acclimate it to outside temperatures. If you do it immediately, it's really going to shock it, and plants don't like those big swings. So do what you can to kind of slowly acclimate it. You can put it in sort of your garage that's cold, but it's still protected, or put it more protected areas outside in your garden. It depends a little bit on how harsh your weather is when you are trying to do this. But yeah, do something to kind of harden it off. And then if you live in a mild area, or you're getting plants that you want to put in a planter right away, or put in your landscape right away, it can go straight from your doorstep into a landscape or outside planters. You don't have to worry about hardening those off, because they've been kind of doing that in the, they came from the nursery, and they've been sort of doing that in the box. So
and all of those plants are actually available right now on shop. So if you've always wanted to send a camellia to somebody, or a little happy spruce, you can do that. But also there's a lot going on at the silos. Brooke, you were talking as we were getting ready for this webinar, just what a busy time it is there. So even in the gardens, there's a lot going on for sure. Take us through what you've got planned and what people can look forward to.
Well, if you're feeling really inspired and you just, want to come down to Waco, Texas, we'd love to have you. Our big event celebration, which we have every single year, is not this weekend, but the following. So October 19th through the 21st. Magnolia actually turns 20 this year, which is super exciting for Chip and Joanna Gaines. I know they're really excited to be here at the silos and host all the guests. So definitely, if you are not too far, we'd love to have you. And we have all of our fall color and installs in right now. We'll also be hosting Christmas at the silos, and it's very lit up and bright and refined, so we definitely have the more refined garden approach here at the Magnolia silos, but also just lots of lights, and it's just really magical to come experience it. So November 24th through the 30th, and it's a good time to kind of knock out some Christmas shopping too. So feel free to follow at Magnolia or at Visit Magnolia. It kind of has a little bit more of the guest facing. And if you want to follow Brooke Garcia Garden, I tend to share, more of my garden centric ideas and what I'm seeing through my lens at Magnolia.
Great. Well, thank you. And a lot of inspiration there, especially, if you're lucky enough to live close enough to go see it, please do. So that concludes our tips, but we have time for some questions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen in case there are a few things that we can answer.
Questions. For sure. We've had so many great questions, and I think we've given everybody a sense of how different winter gardening can be across the country. So such a great mix of questions. Lots of questions about pruning. So Megan, one for you specifically on peony. How far should people be cutting them back?
So a good tip in general, if you're not sure where to cut back your perennials, you can check our website obviously to see the care instructions if there's some specifics on that. But you can learn so much from observing next spring. So if you're not sure, give a little more space, and then next spring see where the foliage is growing from. Some woody things, if it's coming out of that stem, okay, now I need to leave a little more. If it's coming from the base, you can cut it back further. So much to learn just by paying attention to your garden. Peonies all the way back down to the ground, about ground level or a little bit above. Make sure you don't damage the crown in any way. Peonies put up eyes in the spring. Got those cute little, they come take a peek when they're getting ready to come out, so don't damage those for sure.
Perfect. Great. So Brooke, we had a question specifically about the grasses that were in one of the pictures that you had that was kind of below the containers, but more in general too. Why do you like including grasses in the winter garden?
Yeah, so I know in like one of the containers I had the purple fountain grass, which would die back. That's definitely something that does not last. But I do love grasses in the garden. I typically leave them, as long as possible for the winter interest. And I really like the texture and the color of them. And it's just that kind of wildlife interest. But yeah, so grasses are great for the garden for winter interest. You can even kind of like trim some of the dried pieces, and they're kind of fun in little vases just to bring some life into your home.
Mm-hmm. And they have a nice softness to them too. Sort of the plumes, they can have a cozy feel, but later, just a bundle of the grasses together, the cuttings can look really nice in a vase.
Great. So Katie, we have so many questions about specific plants and using them in specific areas. Can you tell everybody how they can find more information about choosing the right plant for their application?
Sure. Maybe it would help if I shared quickly our website. So up at the top, you'll see a tab on Monrovia. It says My Plant Finder. And you can go there, enter your zip code, and then answer a series of, questions. I'm looking for shrubs, and, I'm looking for something, for full shade. You can put in many different filters and then hit search. And, if I do my zip code here, it says I'm really warm. I'm zone 10. But you can search for plant choices that way. And it's searching. And then it will have narrowed down my choices. And you can see plants that you can order right now for spring, if you'd like. So some of our plants you can order and have shipped to your local garden center for pickup in the spring. Or we were talking about the holiday shop. You can come here and you can browse, gifts basically. So both options are available. But if you've got, if you're thinking about, your plant choices for where you live for spring, I strongly suggest My Plant Finder. If you're somebody that's thinking, I need something this height and I don't want to, have it use a lot of water, I want to attract pollinators, whatever your needs are, just plug it into Plant Finder.
Such great information for finding that specific plant that's going to work for you. So that is all the time we have for today. Before I turn it back over to you, Katie, I just wanted to remind everybody that they will be getting a link to today's presentation and a list with the plants that we discussed. So if you're enjoying our webinars, please tell a friend, and you can see past garden conversations on Monrovia's YouTube channel. So Katie, I will toss it back to you.
Thank you. I just want to thank our special guest, Brooke Garcia, for joining us today and sharing her tips. And you can look forward to our next webinar. Will be in February when we kick off spring gardening. So until then, enjoy your winter garden.